This week on Conservative Crossroads, should employers be required to verify the legal status of their workers before offering them a job? Employer verification of legal status of their workers coming up on Conservative Crossroads now. Welcome back to Conservative Crossroads, the podcast where conservatives lean into their differences rather than deny them. I'm Henry Olson, Senior Fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, and your host for this program. Should employers have to verify or confirm the legal status of their workers before offering them a job? That's a contentious issue in the question of immigration, and we have many views within the conservative movement on it. Tonight, I'm joined by two estimable scholars, Daniel Kishi. He is the senior policy analyst at American Compass, who will argue in favor of mandatory employer legal status verification, and David Bier, director of immigration studies at the Cato Institute, who will argue against it. As is our pattern, we will each have 5-minute opening statements by our discussants. Daniel will go first. We will then have 40 minutes or so of mutual questioning and conclude with each person having a 2-minute closing statement going in reverse order of the introductions. Daniel, you're up.
Great. Well, thank you, Henry. Thank you for hosting this conversation. I think I'll probably just begin by stating two principles or two premises. The first, only individuals who are authorized to be in the United States should be here, and only individuals who are authorized to work in the U.S. labor market should work in it. These are not radical claims, not radical premises. They are, in fact, the law of the land, and I think they are the law of the land for good reason. There are, many harms associated with illegal immigrants in the American workforce. The first is that it harms American workers, American citizens, workers who are authorized to be here, especially those with, lower education, lower skills, who often are forced to compete with the illegal immigrants. It pushes downward pressure on wages and conditions. Second is that it harms law-abiding firms. Employers that abide by our immigration law, that verify the employment of their workforce, face a competitive disadvantage relative to employers they are competing against, who hire illicitly and are able to employ their workers with substandard wages and substandard conditions. And thirdly, it corrupts entire sectors of our economy, entire industries. If we allow for businesses within these industries to develop business models that are predicated on access to cheap, oftentimes exploitable labor, it prevents them from making the necessary investments to increase productivity, increase output, increase or train the skills of their workers, and increase wages as a result. I think it's probably worth establishing sort of the scale of the problem. I think estimates suggest that anywhere from 8 to 10 illegal immigrants are in the U.S. labor market. Perhaps those numbers have declined under the enforcement actions of the Trump administration. And it's important to understand why, rather, the incentives that draw illegal immigrants to our country. Illegal immigrants don't come here just for the sake of breaking the law. They don't overstay their visa just for the sake of overstaying their visa. They come here for a job. Jobs are an incredibly powerful magnet that attract illegal immigrants into the United States. And it's important to, ensure that we, to the best of our ability, are able to turn that magnet off. The current system, or the current sort of, regime for employer side verification is, in many ways a dead letter. Employers have to fill out an I-9 form. They do not have to verify the information against a government database. E-Verify, the system for which this information is verified against, is completely voluntary. Only about, I think, 1 in 6 employers voluntarily use the E-Verify system, which I think is a statistic that surprises many Americans. And in addition to sort of insufficient verification protocols, sort of the penalties associated with illicit hiring are quite weak. There are civil penalties. Those civil penalties are often written off at the cost of doing business, and there are very rarely any criminal prosecutions in any given year. And so I think that if we sort of agree with the first two premises that I stated, and for the reasons that they are in fact the law, the question becomes sort of what we do about it. I think border enforcement is a key part of the solution. But I think that a mandatory E-Verify system in which the verification status, authorization status of workers are checked at the hiring desk against a government database ensures that workers in the U.S. labor market are authorized to be here, and that we turn off the magnet that attracts illegal immigrants to the United States in the first place.
Well, thank you, Daniel. David, it's your turn.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you, Daniel, for your presentation. Let me be clear. I don't want illegal immigration. People should come, if they come at all, legally. But this debate has nothing to do with enforcing the law. The whole point here is what the law should be. E-Verify isn't law enforcement. It's a fake shortcut to enforcement. But my main reasons for opposing E-Verify have little to do with immigration policy. First, E-Verify is a national identification system that conservatives since Ronald Reagan have traditionally opposed. An E-Verify mandate would be the largest in-scope government mandate on U.S. employers, U.S. workers, and American families in U.S. history. My basic view here is that it is inconsistent with a free society with limited government for the state to conscript private people into carrying out its goals. The left has for decades tried to eliminate the difference between public and private actors. So we end up with woke mandates on businesses to micromanage their demographics, divest from non-woke industries, mandate healthcare or vaccines, and on and on. If the government wants to engineer society, it should have to do so without conscripting us, free people, in its efforts. Targeting Americans isn't immigration enforcement. It's not. The second, I'm particularly concerned about E-Verify because it creates a new dystopian power, effectively a DC on-off switch for all employment in America. Again, just imagine this power in the hands of your worst enemy, Lois Lerner or Anthony Fauci or Barack Obama or whoever. We already know how Obama mistreated conservative nonprofits and debanked disfavored industries like gun dealers. Unlike the I-9 form, E-Verify infiltrates businesses in a direct way and can remotely and immediately regulate them. It's a reinvention of government overreach. And moreover, the logic of E-Verify, right, making life difficult for illegal immigrants, certainly doesn't stop with jobs. So it will be used for transit and guns and banking and apartments and entry to government properties. If nothing else, E-Verify will create a permanent record of your life. It is mass surveillance, but unlike passive data collection, it comes with a massive opportunity to regulate full participation in society for anyone. And we know it won't stop with jobs because we know E-Verify doesn't actually work, which has already led to calls for its use elsewhere. But in fact, E-Verify has failed everywhere there are 2.9 million illegal immigrants living in the 9 states where E-Verify was mandatory for private employers in 2025, an increase of 1 million over 2012 when these mandates really started getting going. E-Verify doesn't work, but more importantly, it can never work because people can just borrow identification or work under the table. It's just like gun control. The only people who follow it are the rule followers. What actually happens is that more illegal immigrant men end up working for unscrupulous employers and staffing agencies at lower wages, the opposite of E-Verify's goal. Meanwhile, more women enter the labor force to make up for the lower wages of the men. So we end up with more total illegal workers. Don't take it from me, though. DHS itself last year called hiring someone after a clean E-Verify check reckless reliance. Also last year, ICE raided and shut down operations at an E-Verify compliant employer in Nebraska. The raid was real immigration enforcement. E-Verify, however, was fake immigration enforcement. So while it doesn't actually work to stop illegal workers, E-Verify does cause problems for legal workers. Despite the low error rate, there's been nearly 1 million legal workers, this is according to DHS statistics, who were blocked either temporarily or permanently because so many people are being fed through the system. So that low error rate doesn't mean lots of people are not still negatively affected by the flawed system. So on its own terms, E-Verify fails. It doesn't help legal workers. It tracks and harasses them. It does help DC bureaucrats to conscript businessmen into micromanaging our society in whatever way they want. It's not about immigration enforcement. It's about government power. Conservatives should reject it. Thank you, and I look forward to the discussion.
Well, thank you very much, David. And you obviously have strongly divergent views. Who wants to kick off the discussion with a question?
Well, I'm happy to start. I mean, the thing that's when I was trying to listen for was when Daniel, you were presenting, the thing that stood out to me on the economic kind of argument here that you're making isn't really uniquely concerned with illegal immigration. Your sort of basic point was if we reduce the number of workers in these industries, then businesses will invest more in capital, and this is going to lead to more productivity or higher wages or something along those lines. And so I just wanted to confirm what you're basically saying is that the government should also be trying to reduce the legal workers in these industries as well to stimulate more, I don't know, investment or something along those lines. You mentioned the business model of these industries. So I just wanted to confirm you're also, you would apply this same logic to legal immigration and legal workers, and not just, illegal immigration.
Yeah, well, I think in the first instance, I think the analysis applies to, the illegal immigrant population. I think that they are, even more so than like temporary visa programs, uniquely cheap and inexpensive and uniquely exploitable. I think that if, it was the case where we say we're to, over a graduated series or time period, reduce the illegal immigrant population, I think we would necessarily have conditions of greater labor scarcity, which would require businesses to increase the wage that they pay their workers. It also then, though, could force them to make those investment decisions in the capital expenditures to be more productive and to get more out of fewer workers or more expensive workers. I think that you mentioned, or maybe I imagined you mentioning sort of the agricultural sector specifically, and I think that there are anecdotes throughout history and in recent history of examples when farmers, growers, lose access to an immigrant labor pool, and they make the decision to make capital expenditures, do capital substitution. The canonical example here is, of course, the Bracero program, termination, and tomato processed tomato growing in the state of California, where the technology exists, the mechanization systems existed, but it was uneconomic for those growers to purchase the equipment to do this productively, until the point at which they did not have access to the cheap labor. And so, I think in the first instance, just to answer your question, the illegal immigrant population is the lion's share of the problem, but I think the analysis could then be applied to temporary visa programs such as the H-2A, H-2B, to the extent that employers have access to low-cost foreign labor, that will keep wages down or lower than they would otherwise be for domestic citizen workers, and forestall the investments necessary to drastically increase the productivity of a sector that has seen rather stagnant productivity rates.
Well, on the economic analysis point, I just don't buy I just don't understand the argument. I mean, you're basically saying we want farmers to replace all these jobs with robots, and that's going to be good for U.S. workers to have those jobs being done by robots, but it's not good for American workers when those jobs are done by immigrants. I don't understand that point, but it's not really my main point here. My main point is, this is what I'm concerned about, is that we have someone in Washington or wherever saying we know what the right business model is for businesses, and we're going to use this system, this regulatory apparatus, to impose our will on every business in the country. And if that means reducing the number of legal immigrant workers in that industry, if that means reducing the number of U.S. citizen workers in that industry to produce the result that we think is, best for the economy, that's the type of grand vision that Thomas Sowell would have called the vision of the anointed. I mean, it's easy to cite anecdotes or whatever, but look, over the last decade, we've seen 200,000 U.S. farms disappear, go out of business. And so, you can always find that, well, this or that example or that example, the trends here aren't good. And the question that I have is, do the people in DC, should they have the power to regulate the entire economy with a flip of a switch and decide for every business, for every consumer, for every person in the country, what the right amount of capital versus labor is? And look, this is, again, it has nothing to do with illegal immigration. It doesn't. I don't think it works for illegal immigration, but it really has to do with the power that we're going to create. It's actually would work for legal workers. It obviously, because it's only the legal workers who follow the law. It's the illegal workers who don't follow the law. So the only people that this could, in theory, work for are the people who actually follow the law. And if you think like, well, what is E-Verify? I mean, it's essentially a way of regulating licensing for jobs. I mean, it's essentially enforcing a license to work for immigrants right now, but the same principle could be applied to any type of license in the entire economy. And so my concern, I don't think you really haven't lessened my concern on that front that, this system isn't going to be used inappropriately down the line for really technocratic goals that have nothing to do with immigration. It kind of enhances my concern on that point. But I did want to ask you about just the efficacy of the system. I mean, why do you think E-Verify is going to drive illegal workers who are already violating the law out of the country when gun control doesn't stop illegal gun sales, when I-9 didn't stop illegal workers? So what is it about E-Verify that you think is even going to produce some, way in which it's going to reduce illegal immigration?
Yeah, I mean, I think that as it currently stands, the I-9 form, prospective employees provide information, and employers, more or less do sort of an eye check. Does this look valid? Does this look correct? And, in theory, that is like effectively the only verification under the current system. And so long as the employers sort of satisfy what is a very low bar, they completely, inoculate themselves from any civil or criminal penalty. I think the e-verification system is, more or less instantaneous. I think results after putting in the identification information, the vast majority, the lion's share, render a, result in a couple minutes. To the extent that there is sort of a, the system does not, come back with a verification, and I think it's called, the TNC. The workers themselves have, I think it's 6 to 8 days to update the system and ensure that they are in fact, indeed authorized to work in this country. So I think it's quite obvious to me that if those are sort of the two standards, one is sort of an eye check where, employers hold on file these records for 3 years, and unless, immigration enforcement comes knocking and performs an I-9 audit, more or less, it's the employer's word against nobody really, versus a system that in real time or close to real time ensures that these workers are authorized to work in the U.S. labor market. Question for you, if I may. Sure. I mean, I think that you suggest that this would be sort of a tool of some draconian administration to sort of impose their political pet projects on the American people, American businesses. I fail to see how that is how that is possible. The sort of pilot program for E-Verify, the one that employers can currently voluntarily participate in, as well as the legislative proposals that have obviously been floating around for Congress for quite some time, only allow for sort of the up or down, green or red, based off of sort of the personal information that can confirm lawful status, whether a citizen or through other forms of authorization. So the idea that sort of a overreaching bureaucracy in DC will begin to then sort of make judgments or determinations on who can work at any given business seems to me sort of implausible based off how E-Verify has worked since the pilot program was set up in the 90s, and how the legislation would prescribe this program becoming mandatory if it were to become a law.
Yeah, I mean, when Social Security came out, I mean, the Social Security number was just, for the Social Security benefit system. now it's used absolutely everywhere for things that have absolutely nothing to do with Social Security. So the fact that the initial use of this program is, for targeting illegal immigrants, it really has no bearing on the point. The point is we're creating a power here that's really, like I said, totally distinct from anything that we've seen before. I mean, this is really an on-off switch in DC where you can immediately see a regime that really wants to adjust the levers of the economy in some way, resorting to that and say, well, right now it's just on-off if you're authorized to be employed in the United States, but we could change it to whether the employer is authorized to employ someone in the United States. And there's 100,000 different reasons. I mean, you listen to the left and what they say about businesses, and certainly businesses in certain sectors that they think have bad environmental impacts or bad social impacts. There's so many different reasons why a government would say, no, we're not going to allow more hiring in this area. We want to direct workers to this area. That's the type of micromanaging that I'm afraid of. And unfortunately, I mean, your economic analysis and argument leads me to believe that people who accept your arguments on the economic benefits here could reach for E-Verify to keep out U.S. citizen workers or legal workers out of industries that they want to see more capital investment in or more technology being used in those industries. Because, I mean, look, we know the left thinks that there shouldn't be any low wage jobs in America. I mean, they shouldn't exist. We should have a mandatory minimum wage of, $20 an hour, whatever they're up to now. I mean, the idea that this will not be used for reasons that have nothing to do with immigration enforcement seems incredibly naive when you look at the history of the left on virtually every issue and the history of the Social Security number. Now it's being used for something, again, for immigration enforcement purposes that have nothing to do with Social Security. So I can give you countless examples and ideas, but the point is there shouldn't be this power. And that's the thing that concerns me is like, this is really a principled argument to some extent. I don't think the government should be allowed to conscript private citizens in this effort. And so my question for you is, why limit it to jobs? Why aren't we doing E-Verify checks for every household guest and your nanny and your friends and your bridesmaids at your wedding? And why is it limited to just jobs? Why, wouldn't it be more effective to just have a society-wide mandate here? Obviously, E-Verify hasn't worked already, so why not apply it to everyday interactions that you have?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is probably sort of certainly scapegoating the position. I mean, I think that there is sort of a spectrum that we find ourselves on, which is one being sort of the status quo, I-9 forms, very infrequent I-9 audits, scouts honor from employers that they have done their due diligence in ensuring that these workers are here legally. And sort of what you have sort of put this up against and propose is sort of a vision of totalitarianism for which simply mandating E-Verify far closer to the status quo than policing every engagement we might have in the course of our lives. I think that
but why not? I mean, wouldn't that drive out illegal workers and illegal people? Isn't that the point? So my whole point here is like, what's the principle? Like, do you have a limiting principle here? Like, where does
principle is enforcement of our immigration law, which Congress passed in 1986. They created standards that it is illegal for employers to hire illegal immigrants. The question is like, what system optimizes for enforcement of that law, of the law passed by Congress? You have the I-9 system, which again is insufficiently sort of robust to protect the U.S. labor market from illicit workers. And you have an E-Verify system that ensures and verifies at the hiring desk whether those workers should be here. I do have a question for you. You at least if my memory serves, sort of conceded the argument that you also do not want any illegal immigrants here in the U.S. labor market, and you also sort of positioned E-Verify as sort of fake enforcement against the workplace rates or the work site enforcement as the real enforcement. Now, in my mind, I say, why not both? I don't think those are certainly, mutually exclusive. But I guess if you are committed to the sort of protection of the U.S. labor market from, illegal immigrants, and you sort of are concerned with E-Verify and the slippery slope of some totalitarian regime that will sort of regulate every interaction that American citizens have with one another. Would you like to see significant investments in internal enforcement agencies? Would you like to see significant increases of I-9 audits where you're not necessarily, raiding a work site and, arresting workers on site, but you are doing thorough verification and examination and an audit of the papers, and then assessing the civil and criminal penalties that current law allows for? And likewise, would you be supportive of increasing those civil and criminal penalties, even under the current regime, so as to further disincentivize as a way to prevent, the construction of this totalitarian infrastructure that you suggest E-Verify is?
Well, look, I mean, you can do all of those things without E-Verify. So, I mean, E-Verify has nothing to do with the amount of money we spend on interior enforcement. It has nothing to do with how much we spend on I-9 audits or whatever. I mean, look, I-9 audits, they don't work either. I mean, we had the highest number ever under Obama, and they were totally ineffectual. I mean, it's just shifting people around from one job to the other. And they have the exact same effect as E-Verify when it comes to what happens to illegal workers. Yes, they get pushed into more unscrupulous employers and move from state to state or location to location or from job to job, and they end up with lower wages than they would have before. They don't actually stop the underlying problem. And so, it's all about opportunity.
If E-Verify is unacceptable, if the status quo system doesn't work, but you nonetheless would like, at least as you suggest, to reduce as practical the sort of presence of illegal immigrants in the U.S. labor market, what remedies are you putting on the table to actually address that? Or is it simply an impossible problem to solve, a fait accompli? There just will always be millions and millions and millions of illegal immigrants and the ascendant sort of harms associated with that.
Well, look, I mean, we don't have E-Verify now, and there's hardly anyone crossing the border. So that proves that we can have a system where, very few people enter the country illegally without imposing this new mandate on businesses and on workers with all the attendant harms and risks associated with that system. And so, I don't see why E-Verify doesn't add anything to that. It doesn't produce any better results. It produces worse results and doesn't actually stop the problem. You actually have to do real immigration enforcement to reduce the number of illegal immigrants in the country. And look, I mean, do I support mass deportation? No, I don't want, I think people should have a process by which they can come legally to the United States. That's the best way to reduce illegal immigration cheaply. But, this Congress, they've gone another way. They're spending $240 billion to enforce kind of a mass deportation agenda. But that's the real alternative. The $250 billion in spending, that is the real immigration enforcement. That is actually what you have to do if you want to reduce illegal immigration. Not E-Verify, which doesn't add anything to that. It doesn't reduce the cost of that. It's just a total government power play with no upside. And so if you want to spend the $240 billion, which I think is a waste of money as well, versus having a legal immigration system that works, I mean, those are different options, but at the end of the day, there's no evidence that E-Verify adds anything to either one of those situations. And I mean, look, when you say, I mean, it's not my main argument, but the idea that this is just a simple thing, and then anytime any employer violates it, we should just destroy the employer. I mean, basically, that's what, when you're talking about making these fines enormous and criminalizing it and all of this stuff, I mean, you have to understand that it's actually a very complicated thing. There's an entire body of law around E-Verify, I-9 compliance. So just to give you an example, here's a totally common situation. You're a builder, you have a crew, you move from job to job. You don't need roofers or plumbers or whoever on one job, but then you need them on the next. Do you know if you have to E-Verify them each time that you bring them back? I mean, just do you know the answer to that?
I mean, under current law, no builder is required to E-Verify anybody because it's voluntary.
I mean, if you voluntarily participate in it, then you have to follow the rules of it. And it's not voluntary in Arizona and South Carolina and Florida and several other states. I mean, the answer is it depends on the length of time. And the length of time isn't even set out in regulation. And the required amount of time that you're allowed to essentially not use them or not pay them before you have to then do the E-Verify check actually conflicts with the amount of time that you're allowed to recycle the I-9 form that they originally filled out. So it's not easy. These are just one example. I mean, just another example of this. Do you know whether for the I-9, ICE uses the IRS or DOL definition of who is an employee? I mean, it versus an independent contractor, right? I mean, these are complicated issues that employers have to wade through when they're doing this. South Carolina, most aggressive state on enforcing E-Verify. They do tons of audits, far more than any other state. They've only ever found paperwork violations, meaning they didn't fill out the form when they were supposed to fill out the form. And so the idea that we're going to go around bankrupting all of these businesses and causing enormous problems for their American employees and these American entrepreneurs is just crazy. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, especially when the system doesn't work.
I think the question I would like to ask is, what should be done about illegal labor? Should labor be illegal at all? That if we have 8 to 10 million people who currently are not legally able to work in the United States who are working, is that a problem? I think Daniel says yes. David, do you think that's an issue that is a real problem, or is the cost of actually trying to enforce the current law, which is that they can't legally work, far outweigh any of the possible benefits from dealing with the existing number of illegal workers already in the labor force?
Well, I think black markets are a problem. I mean, they cause all sorts of issues for employers. I agree with Daniel that it's unfair to very highly scrupulous employers, and even unfair to the ones who they use E-Verify and then they still get audited, and then the audit turns up, well, actually these workers were using fake IDs or someone's identity or whatever. And so the black market is the problem. The question is, how do you deal with a black market? I mean, what's the best way to address it? I mean, if we had licenses on the number of construction workers in the economy, and it was set in 1990 and never adjusted, then you'd end up with lots of illegal construction workers who are U.S. citizens who couldn't get licenses because there's a cap on the number of licenses, and that would be a real problem for the country. The best response to that is the free market one, which is have a more liberal licensing regime that lets people legally work in these industries. And I think from what I heard from Daniel is basically that whole idea of a legal immigration system that's based on markets and based on demand should be off the table for reform. And I think once you say that, then you're committing yourself not to E-Verify, which doesn't work, but to the $250 billion mass deportation campaign and all the stuff that Trump has done since he's come back into office.
It just sounds, if I don't want to put words into your mouth, but it sounds to me like your approach would be deregulatory, which is to say, legalize their status and the problem is solved, because the fact that they're here already represents the fact that employers demand labor at a lower price than the American citizen is willing to provide.
Yeah, I mean, I think having a system that works going forward, it's self-correcting. I mean, it's like tax law or anything else. You want to have an opportunity if someone does violate the tax rules. It shouldn't immediately then they go to prison for the rest of their life. There should be an opportunity for them to file late and pay a penalty and get on the right side of the law. The same thing goes here. We should have a legal immigration system that works. If there's a problem, someone violates a rule or something, there should be a reasonable way for them to get back on the right side of the law. Because otherwise, then they'll just continue to be this black market that festers forever.
So let me ask you a question, Daniel, and that's with respect to the principle behind E-Verify, which is that a way to, I guess, self-deport people is to dry up their source of income. Would you be favorable to extending an E-Verify principle to things, services that are under either publicly financed, like healthcare or education, or are directly under public control, like licenses? Would you require somebody who wants to get a driver's license to have to demonstrate legal status in the country, or someone who wants to access a hospital that receives Medicare or Medicaid funding to have to demonstrate legal status in order to receive care?
I mean, I think that in terms of benefiting from public benefits, I think it is perfectly reasonable and consistent with sort of social welfare principles to ensure that those that benefit from these programs are citizens or otherwise authorized to be here. Now, whether that be Medicaid or Medicare or any other sort of public health programs, would probably allow for hospitals or emergency services to be rendered to whoever comes in the door and sort of needs life-saving care. I think it should very clearly, to me, be applied to sort of driver's license, especially commercial driver's license. I think that this is actually one of the most under the radar but important enforcement actions that the Trump administration has taken, which is to sort of really crack down on sort of the number of non-citizens, non-residents, illegal workers that have been handed commercial driver's license by state departments of motor vehicles. I think that we see this not just as like a public safety concern where there are sort of news reports of drivers getting in car accidents and lo and behold the driver cannot read or speak English, which you would think would be sort of a baseline requisite to drive on American roads. But it again sort of is a perfect microcosm of the sort of illicit employment problem writ large, which is that the influx of illegal workers that have been handed these commercial driver's license push down the wages and the rates for American citizen truck drivers. And it creates that competitive disadvantage for the trucking companies that employ American workers. The trucking companies that willfully violate our immigration laws are also far more likely to willfully violate other sort of safety regulations in terms of sort of maximum hours that can be driven on any given day. And so I think the principle is broadly applicable, not just to labor markets, but to social welfare programs in general, for which the American people pay into and expect that these programs pay out to the American citizens or people that should benefit from them.
Well, I got a few minutes left, so let me just ask a question that's applicable to either of you. A number of economists argue in a whole series of areas that regulation is inefficient, but that there are things that people do that affect larger populations for which the actors do not bear the cost. The technical term is externalities. It's kind of a geeky term. I think both of you are familiar of it. And they argue that the argument there is some sort of cost allocation, taxation, often called a Pigouvian tax. Would either of you favor, as an alternative to the regulatory approach of E-Verify, some sort of Pigouvian tax on people who employ non-legal labor? That, yeah, you can employ non-legal labor, but that causes a decline, or we estimate that has a negative social effect of X amount, and you'll have to pay a 20% tax on your compensation that you pay to that person. Do you think that a Pigouvian tax would be a market-oriented but still regulatory enforcement-minded way to address the question of illegal migration without engaging in the sort of regulatory and enforcement overreach that David is concerned about?
Well, I guess I can go first, maybe. I mean, I think that's probably better than nothing, but of course it depends on what the tax is set at. If it's set too high, then you don't have any improvement at all. It's obviously going to be completely arbitrary, whatever you end up setting it at. And so I wouldn't trust the government to come up with the right tax there. And of course, if they did decide to tax it, it wouldn't be illegal labor anymore. It would be legal labor. So it's sort of a interesting idea, but I'm not really confident that they'll come up with it. At the end of the day, I mean, it's not really that different than immigrants paying a penalty or a fee to be able to access the legal immigration system again. Right now, of course, they're here illegally because they can't access the legal immigration system. And so, a tax on, that employers pay would just be passed on to workers in terms of lower wages and less compensation in other ways. And so I don't really see it as distinct from all the ideas that, already kind of dominate this space, which is, the best and easiest way, most enforceable way to deal with this problem is just let people pay a fee or penalty in order to access the legal immigration system. And if they qualify, then they can go on their way and and we don't have to deal with the illegal immigration problem.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it could, neutralize some of the competitive advantages or disadvantages between firms that follow the law and those that choose not to. It doesn't, I think, really implicate the workers, whether, citizens are authorized or illegal one way or the other. And I think that like the market principle, or rather the pro-market reform, to my mind, is in fact, border enforcement and e-verify, policing the boundaries of the labor market, ensuring labor market participants are allowed and authorized to be within it. Then you can allow the market principles to take effect and see what the market clearing wage rates for this job and that industry truly are under sort of the conditions of a properly policed labor market.
Well, that brings us to the end of our mutual discussion. We're turning now to the closing statements segment of our program. David, you're up. 2 minutes.
Yeah, I think when I laid out at the beginning the concern about this being used for other purposes, for really empowering the government to micromanage the economy, I think what we heard from Daniel is really not responsive to that concern. It really sounds to me like he would try to set up a system that would reduce the number of legal workers, that really doesn't have the guardrails necessary to prevent this type of misbehavior by the government. And so I think when you're thinking about, whether to support E-Verify or not, you have to think about what are the consequences of giving governments the power to regulate the entire society in this way. And really, I mean, E-Verify, maybe it sounds good for illegal immigration, but it's not going to sound so good when it's being used for guns. And now we have a gun registry of every single gun owner in America and every single gun purchase in America, empowering people who want to regulate guns and prevent them from not just falling into the hands of illegal immigrants, but falling into the hands of U.S. citizens who want to use them for self-defense and other purposes. So I think that's sort of my main point. The second point is that E-Verify doesn't work. And so what you're really signing up for is empowering the government to regulate the entire economy in this way, and not actually achieve the goals set out by the system. In fact, it actually creates more problems for legal workers as a result of E-Verify errors, but also it actually results in lower wages for illegal workers than they otherwise would have had. So it doesn't drive them out, it drives them to worse employment opportunities. And so it's ineffective. It's going to empower the government in ways that we can't even comprehend at this time. And I think if you, at a minimum, you just think about whether this system will actually accomplish the goals that the proponents say it will. It's proven the opposite everywhere it's been tried. And so I think you have to reject the proposition on those reasons alone. Thank you.
Daniel, the last word is with you.
Sure. I'll maybe begin by just re-articulating the principles I stated at the beginning, which is that I think, only individuals authorized to be in the United States should be here, and only individuals authorized to work in the U.S. labor market should work within it. Employment opportunities, jobs are, the single largest magnet for illegal immigration into the United States. And I think that if we want, as a country, to be serious about enforcing laws that are already on the books, we have to sort of think seriously about what a more optimal enforcement system might look like. E-Verify, verification at the hiring desk, to ensure that such workers that apply for a job are authorized to work here. If they are not authorized to work for here, they will be rejected. That is one way we can turn off the magnet. E-Verify is not, of course, a silver bullet. Border enforcement is important. As David suggested, worksite enforcement via sort of audits is important. Imposing penalties, both civil and criminal, not in some attempt to bankrupt businesses, but to ensure that there is sufficient deterrent and a sufficient incentive for abiding by our immigration law. All part of the toolkit necessary to ensure that the two principles of ensuring that individuals that are authorized to be in our country and work on our labor market are able to do so.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, David. And thank you, listeners. Please join me, Henry Olson, again in 2 weeks for another episode of Conservative Crossroads. The topic, should government regulate the development of artificial intelligence? Take care.